All right, can you disinherit your spouse in Florida? Maybe good or bad. Maybe you're just, in the process of getting divorced and you're like, look, I don't want him or her to get anything. I need to update my will before we get divorced. I need to do my trust before I'm in the process of it. I don't want them to get anything. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe there's not any tension or anything like that. But maybe maybe you and your spouse have an agreement where it's a second marriage and you want everything to go to your kids and they want everything to go to their kids, and you're like, my house is my house, his or her house is his or her house. We're good. We just want to put that in writing so that it's very clear. And we see this all the time, and for better or for worse, right? I don't know if it's good or bad. Florida's very strict about not allowing you to just completely disinherit your spouse when you do it via a will or a trust, okay? You can disinherit your spouse. There are ways to do it, but don't just assume you can put in your will, where I see this a lot, is someone just says, hey, I want to leave everything to my kids. I don't want my wife to get anything, right? Some version of that. And again, sometimes it's nice, like it's, hey, me and my wife, we have other families. We came to this marriage. We agreed that what's mine is mine, what's hers is hers. I don't want her to get anything. Or sometimes it's a little bit more stronger. Listen, I don't want my wife. She knows why I don't want her to get anything, right? Something like that. You can't just do that. If you want to disinherit your spouse, you're probably gonna have to have a prenuptial agreement or a postnuptial agreement. Prenuptial agreement would have been done before the marriage, pre-marriage, saying, and at that point you all would have agreed what's yours is yours, what's theirs is theirs, and you would have worked out some sort of agreement. The prenuptial agreement would have been very clear about, who gets what of a person's stuff. It's even going to say, most likely, upon our death, this is what we want to happen, some version of that. If that is done, you should be good. You could come into that marriage, and even without a will or without a trust, the prenuptial agreement could even say, be as specific as that, as, you're essentially disinherit. The prenuptial agreement probably wouldn't say disinherit, but essentially that's what you're doing. Or maybe you didn't know about that, and maybe you and your spouse are in agreement about that, and you got married and you're like, whoa, I didn't know I couldn't, you're watching this video, you're like, oh, I didn't know I couldn't disinherit my spouse. And we both agree that the house I had before we got married is going to go to my kids. The house she had before she got married is going to go to her kids. What do? Well, you could do a postnuptial agreement. Postnuptial different than prenuptial, meaning you did it after the wedding, post-marriage. And now you could go to the family law attorney, the divorce attorney, and draft up those postnuptial agreements saying that whatever you want to happen. And then again, chances are you're good. So if you're in both those situations, prenuptial or postnuptial, you can see both spouses have to pretty much be in agreement that you're working out what's going to happen. That's the nicer situation. But if you don't like each other, then you might not. The other spouse has to agree, and they might say, no, I'm not giving up my inheritance. Why would I do that? You're going to die before me. I want what you have, right? So they may not be in agreement about doing any sort of postnuptial, prenuptial agreement. In that case, you're kind of out of luck. There's really not a whole lot that you can do. Again, you can't just write a will or write a trust. And I've had, people come to me before and say, hey, look, I don't want my wife here, or I don't want my husband here. And, I don't know if we're going to get divorced, but I think we might get divorced. And I just don't want them to get anything if I were to die. Well, if you were to die and you're still married and you don't have that prenuptial or postnuptial agreement, even if your will said I completely disinherit my spouse, he or she's going to get some stuff. And Florida is very clear about percentages and amounts and houses, which is, complex, but it's relatively clear when you're doing it. So you can't just leave them out. Now, if you get divorced, obviously, during the divorce process, the courts or the judge or the settlement agreement, whatever it is, you guys are going to figure out who gets what of a person's stuff. And then once you're legally divorced, they're not going to be entitled to any inheritance anyways, because they're not legally married. So if you're looking, hopefully you're not looking to get divorced, but if you're looking to get divorced, and you didn't do any, maybe try to do a postnuptial agreement. Maybe they'll be on board with it. But if you don't have that postnuptial, you don't have that prenuptial agreement, and you're in Florida, at least as of right now, as of recording this, you can't just disinherit your spouse via a will or via a trust.